Hello, everyone. My name is Eric DeLay. I'm a partner with Husch Blackwell out of our Denver office. I am the co-chair of our artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and data privacy practice groups. And as a result, I assist clients navigating through cybersecurity and technology topics, both from a compliance and a strategy perspective. I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Before we begin, as with most of these events, we go through a couple of housekeeping items for you. At the top of your audience console, there are multiple applications for you to use during the program today. If you have any questions during the webcast, please type them into the box. I'm not certain if we'll have time to answer them live because we do have some back and forth that we've hopefully saved for the end, but we will look to see if we can answer questions afterwards and reach out to you after the fact. There is the opportunity to use auto-generated closed caption for today's program. You can turn it on by selecting the CC button in the bottom right corner of the media player box. Today's program has been approved for legal education hours. For live events, you report your hours by clicking on the continuing education sign-in link at the top of your screen. A certificate of attendance, including the course number, will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with a copy of the recording from today's session. By having CLE, that does mean we have some polling questions in there that we ask you to interact with us for. Toward the end of the program, please complete our survey. This is one of our first opportunities to have a joint speakers and dual hosted event. So we look forward to getting your feedback and recommendations or interest areas for future events like today. So that's it for the housekeeping. Let me get started by introducing my colleagues. Joining me today is Ted Tyson. He is the managing director with FTI Consulting. At FTI Consulting, Ted offers strategic, actionable guidance on a wide range of cybersecurity challenges, including due diligence assessments, threat intelligence, regulatory compliance, and data breach class action cases. With his deep experience in expert witness testimony and investigations, Ted delivers informed solutions specific to a client's needs. Next is our guest speaker, Mr. David Stearns. He is involved with risk insights at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Dave works with CISA's vulnerability management team, leading the pre-ransomware notification initiative. He's worked with states, cities, local governments, tribal nations, public utilities, and others to help strengthen their cybersecurity posture. Dave holds a CISSP certification. I have worked with Dave on events in the past. He has been a great resource, and I'm grateful to have him join us today. So with that, Dave, I'm going to go on mute and let you kick us off to discuss ransomware.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks for having me here today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a unique initiative we have here at CISA that I happen to lead, the Pre-Ransomware Notification Initiative, what we've learned from conducting this activity, and kind of use that as a device to talk about the current threat environment, whether you're a small business, medium business, large business. Hopefully this will be relevant for you. So what is the Pre-Ransomware Notification Initiative? What would we say we do here? So we collaborate with cybersecurity researchers, cyber threat intelligence firms, infrastructure providers who have visibility and understanding on the activities of ransomware gangs, their affiliates, the initial access brokers who provide intrusions to them. And when they see US companies or organizations in friendly nations that have been adversely affected, it could be a ransomware gang has obtained some credentials, a malware infection, something of this nature, they'll let us know that because it's a precursor to an eventual ransomware event. We'll go through a number of steps to quickly notify the folks that are affected. So sometimes we see ransomware gangs can go from initial access to domain admin, like control over the whole network, in minutes. So I'll talk a little bit more about this, but it's really important that we act quickly. And when we reach out, it's important that folks can internalize the information we're sharing and act quickly as well. So what we're trying to do here is give folks the opportunity to evict threat actors from their network before the worst consequences of a ransomware attack occur. And we want to reduce, not just the probability of you paying a ransom. That's not really what this is all about. We want to stop operational impacts, other financial ramifications, litigation, all the things that can result from a ransomware event. So what has the impact been? Wouldn't really be a good government showing if I wasn't right up front about where your tax dollars are going and what the impact has been from this. So obviously we want to prevent ransomware incidents, but by disrupting the attacks after the ransomware gangs or their affiliates have already invested time and money and other resources in their infrastructure. They have job descriptions, they have titles within their organizations. They purchase virtual private servers. One of the best things that we can do is disrupt them early on, so that all their investment is a waste. If they don't have a return on investment, their business model is not sustainable, and it won't continue to be a going concern. So that's our goal. We also want to limit the social harm that results from successful encryption. So this is everyday citizens, your customers, and we try to be compassionate with the cybersecurity teams that we're communicating with on the day of. For some of them, this could be the worst day of their careers. They're getting a lot of questions from leadership. It's very stressful. So we try not to create more questions than answers. We try to give them actionable information in a timely manner, in a digestible form, so they can defend the business. And then finally, we want to drive broader public-private collaboration for scalable disruption of ransomware groups. It's great that we do these notifications, but what are the other outputs that are a boon to society? How else are we sharing our insights? Well, if you're familiar with the stopransomware.gov site, that's a one-stop shop where all of the federal agencies share all of their products, often their collaborative products related to different ransomware variants and best practices. And a lot of the information that ends up in those products and alerts is derived from our conduct of this mission activity. Finally, it's really corny, especially coming from the government, but we want to build trust. And I kind of look at that in a three-dimensional sense. We want to build trust with the folks that are tipping us and providing information that helps us stop the ransomware attacks. And it's a very transparent feedback process. The best way that we can do that is by acting faithfully on the information they share with us. Just in the same way that they can see an incident is occurring in the first place, they can see if soon after sharing the information with CISA, did we stop that incident? Did we get through to the entity? Second, we're building trust with the folks we're notifying, and hopefully that leads to them collaborating with us in the future. Hopefully that leads to them providing feedback that we can provide back to our partners that we collaborate with, and that we can put into alerts and advisories and pay forward to other folks. And then finally, we want to build broader trust within the ecosystem by not just keeping the information in that we're learning, but sharing our broader insights, which I'll do a little bit of that today. So here's the numbers. In summary, since we started, it's now at over 4,400 of these notifications. These are only the ones where we were able to share actionable information with the entity before encryption and data exfiltration. And we estimate I don't endorse any specific commercial product or service, but the security firm Sophos does do a state of ransomware report where they calculate, based on survey data, the average recovery cost of a ransomware incident. And it's important to note that that cost doesn't just incorporate the potential ransom payment. It incorporates, business disruption, litigation, emergency incident response contracts, all of these sorts of things. That cost has gone down this year to about $1.5 million per incident for the average incident, but last year it was about $2.73 million. So based on those numbers, we're sitting at around $9.9 billion of value for the American people. How does it work? So like I said, we've cultivated these partnerships, these relationships with the security research community. These are folks that might share information with CISA because they might be rebuffed, reaching out to organizations directly, who don't understand, that they have good intent, that they're acting out of altruism. Something that I know Eric and Ted might cover in a little bit more detail is they might want targeted liability protections that organizations who share cyber threat indicators or defensive measures receive under the CISA 2015 law if they share with CISA. So this is after they remove any PII that's not relevant for a cybersecurity purpose. So these things together, these folks wanting to act out of altruism to help you, and certain liability protections that they might receive, encourage them to share with us. And then we vet those tips quickly, very quickly for the government. We look at whether we can definitively attribute who the affected entity is. Does the information we're receiving line up with expected tactics, techniques, and procedures we would expect to see for a certain ransomware gang or affiliate? And then we develop tailored mitigation and hunt guidance for each different type of threat activity. And then we cut a notification out of band. This means, and this is an important point because we run into some confusion sometimes where folks aren't familiar with this concept. When I say out of band, I'm saying there's an intrusion that's taking place on a network or on your network if you're being notified. And we don't want to tip off the threat actors or break operational security by sending information about exactly what they're doing while they maintain access to that network. So often we will request to send the information to an email account or otherwise off of the enterprise network that's affected. So we'll often use our cybersecurity advisors. These are folks in your states, in your communities that we have deployed across the country. For those that are members of the JCDC, CISA will reach out directly. And then we also conduct notifications through national certs for friendly nations to notify organizations in their countries. So we get those out. The time horizon we're talking about here is minutes and hours, not days and weeks. And then hopefully in the meme you see here, the payoff is we stop ransomware and we get voluntary feedback from the folks we're notifying that we can pay forward to other similarly situated entities, that we can pay forward in alerts. If we are aware from the tipping that we receive of a specific vulnerability that has been exploited, we will make sure that that information makes it into CISA's known exploited vulnerability catalog, or KEV. This is an extremely useful resource for organizations. This is a public catalog where when CISA becomes aware that there is credible exploitation in the wild of a certain vulnerability and there is a fix to address it, we put it in this catalog. And a newer feature of this catalog is that it also denotes whether the vulnerability is known to be used in ransomware campaigns, so you can further prioritize addressing those vulnerabilities. We also have a sister initiative called the Ransomware Vulnerability Warning Pilot. We love our acronyms. It is the government. So this initiative, rather than notifying you that you've already got an intrusion, which is a really bad day, they just tell you that you have a moderately bad day by informing you that your organization is showing public infrastructure for a vulnerability that is known by us to have been used in the furtherance of a ransomware event. So it also, the information that I might receive in conduct of pre-ransomware notifications, if we know that a specific vulnerability was exploited, we'll let them know so they can take more proactive steps to do a prevalence poll looking at the whole ecosystem, the whole country, all the critical infrastructure sectors, and cut even more proactive notifications. And then finally, we cannot do this alone. I'm not going to steep everyone in all the federal cyber policy, but it's important to understand that at a national level, there are these concepts of threat response and asset response. DOJ, through the FBI, leads threat response, and this is investigative activity, pursuing the threat actor, putting them in cuffs. And then CISA, we're more the firefighters. We lead asset response. So we are providing assistance to mitigate the incident and helping put out the fire. So we make sure that our law enforcement partners are also resourced with information that may concern threat actors and their activities so that they can appropriately pursue them and fulfill their missions as well. What are we learning? What are some insights that I have to share here? Well, looking at this slide, you might think to yourself, there's nothing surprising here. I've heard about all of these risks, and I understand that these are all ways that threat actors can get initial access into a network. The problem is that even in Fortune 100 companies and organizations that have extremely good resourcing, we are still seeing these tactics being successful every single day. So on a daily basis, we're seeing the social engineering. So you might be familiar with some of the public reporting on comm-affiliated actors who have made contact with companies, at least in the retail and other sectors. And what they do is they contact the help desk, impersonate a user, and change or add multi-factor authentication factors to a user account so that they can obtain access to a network. It seems pretty lowbrow, but this is going on a regular basis. We also see threat actors creating a sense of urgency by making it seem to an employee of your organization like they're having an IT problem that they need help with. They call the employee using like a soft phone application or Teams, impersonating the IT staff, and use that as the pretext to get remote access to their device. This is surprisingly successful. Theft of legitimate credentials. So I don't want to just talk about phishing. People always talk about phishing, but let's talk about phishing as a service kits, which is the commercialization of phishing, the lowering of barriers to entry to running successful phishing campaigns. So these kits are sold online. You can use them to customize a phishing campaign. You can change the landing pages to make them look believable for the organization that you're targeting. You can customize the language that's used in the phishing emails. And most importantly, a lot of them are sophisticated to the point where they let the threat actor intercept multi-factor authentication tokens, session cookies, and other information that is useful beyond passwords to obtain access and maintain access to an organization's network. So this is something that we see all the time, every day. Info stealer logs. So info stealers are malware variants that are specifically factored to collect credentials and information. Sometimes those credentials are then used in furtherance of a ransomware event. Exploitation of internet-facing vulnerabilities. No magic here. The threat actors are watching news about the release of new vulnerabilities, just like we are. They'll find a public proof of concept, which is code to exploit a vulnerability from a public source like GitHub. They might not change anything about it, and they'll just throw that exploit, obtain access. A lot of the times, unfortunately, the devices that they're able to exploit are devices that have a security purpose. So things like virtual private network VPN devices. So I'm not endorsing or denigrating any specific product or service, but examples could be Fortinets, Cisco's, Sonic Wall devices. This is everyday, folks. Pre-existing malware infections. So we see malware make its way onto end user devices in a variety of creative methods. But recently, there's been a lot of malvertising, which is where the threat actors run ad campaigns just like any commercial business would. They can target specific demographics, and they are often the ads are displayed at the top of search results. So a user that doesn't know the difference between an ad and a search result might be prone to clicking on them, and they advertise things like legitimate applications, maybe like Teams or Zoom, and it's an imposter executable that ends up being malware. VPN brute forcing. So this is just guessing, trying combinations of passwords until you're able to access a network. Why does this work? It's because folks are not using multi-factor authentication. They don't have a lockout on attempts to block login attempts after a certain amount of times that the threat actor has submitted credentials. And then post-intrusion, I would say the themes du jour that we're seeing a whole lot of every single day is methods to escalate privileges that specifically include Kerberoasting. So this is going to be a new word in everyone's vocabulary today. If you're a lawyer, you can scare your IT people coming to them with this word Kerberoasting. So what I'm talking about here is a threat actor who has obtained control over just an unprivileged standard user account. They can send requests to a device called a domain controller on your network that manages your identities, your accounts, and they can say, "Hi, domain controller, please return to me password hashes that are weakly encrypted so that I can break the encryption and get plain text passwords. I can get passwords for administrator accounts, service accounts, other accounts that let me take over the network and ultimately deploy ransomware." This is a feature of how Active Directory infrastructure, Microsoft infrastructure works. So this is something that can be guarded against by folks using stronger encryption for password hashes, by changing things about their environment where these requests will not be responded to by the domain controller. Yet we see this every day, and this can lead to a widespread identity compromise where an organization might think that only a single device or user account is compromised, but they have a widespread compromise where many accounts are under the control of the threat actor. And then I'll stop here. by mentioning the proliferation of remote monitoring and management tools. These are tools like Screen Connect, TeamViewer, Atera, etc. I don't endorse or denigrate any specific tool. The threat actors obtain trial accounts of these remote management tools, which can be used for legitimate business purposes to remote into end user devices to help them patch or help them with IT issues. The threat actors have taken a preference to these because they're not detected by security solutions by default as malware, because they're not. And there's a low barrier to entry because you don't have to buy anything. You can just get a trial version of these tools and then use them as malware, essentially, to maintain remote access to a network. So we have responded or notified organizations regarding incidents where there are up to 6 of these tools on a single device. I'm going to talk about one more topic here, just to illustrate that these tactics are not unique to ransomware gangs, and a lot of these tactics are also employed by nation-state actors. So recently, there was widespread exploitation of vulnerability chain in SharePoint. Everyone's pretty familiar with Microsoft SharePoint. This happened in the July timeframe. And so essentially, the too long didn't read is that the threat actors were exploiting 2 different vulnerabilities that let them get something called machine keys that enabled them to fully access SharePoint applications and also connected devices. This is very bad. This leads to a widespread intrusion and compromise of the affected network. But something that's important to discuss here is that these were known vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities had been published on. There was information publicly about the fact that these were being exploited in the wild, and we still saw widespread victimization. After exploitation, the threat actors were dropping malware, but something that complicated the response is that they were also running malware that was in memory only and wasn't a file that was dropped on the device, and that presents challenges because it makes it unclear. It makes it harder to investigate. It challenges the investigation of what occurred and makes it harder to understand if the threat actors were successful. So that's why patching up front and prioritizing known vulnerabilities for patching is so important, is because it saves your incident responders, your IT folks, a lot of pain and a lot of time in trying to understand the full impact of the event. This activity was attributed by industry to People's Republic of China threat actors. And then after some of the initial activity, the threat actors began to deploy ransomware on compromised systems. So this shows that there can be a bleed over from the criminal world to the nation state world. The final point I want to make here is patching enough? This has become kind of an existential question, and it's an issue that we run into on a daily basis. Organizations sometimes believe that if we patch vulnerabilities, that we are safe. The problem is that if the threat actors exploit the vulnerabilities, and as is in this case, before the organization patches, they can obtain machine keys, in this case, that allow them to still access the network. So it's a token that still allows them to have an ongoing intrusion. So it's a form of persistence through patching, we call it. You still have access to that network, even if the affected organization applies a patch or an update. Another issue here is that a lot of the times organizations won't understand that there's another form of persistence through patching possible, which is if malware has been dropped on that device and then you apply the patch, that malware is still there and the threat actor still maintains access to that device. So yes, there's a lot of talk about patching, about making sure that you're addressing known vulnerabilities, but there's some danger if you assume that patching is an all-encompassing solution and the threat actors take advantage of that. So I just want to cover this because there's been a number of cases recently where there's been widespread exploitation of internet-facing vulnerabilities. Threat actors obtain credentials or drop malware. And then after the organization patches, there's an intrusion because the root issues that exist that give that threat actor access to the network have not been addressed. All right, I'll end here, conclude my presentation with a few no-cost resources. If folks are not familiar with it, I would recommend taking a look at stopransomware.gov and the Stop Ransomware Guide. So these are all of our best practices in one place to address the risk posed by ransomware. And by proxy, as we've shown here, by addressing those risks, you're also going to address the risks that are posed by nation state actors as well. We also have our cybersecurity performance goals. It's corny, but these are the best of best practices. These are the most important, lowest hanging fruit practices that organizations can put in place. And to address a lot of the tactics that I mentioned here, just addressing known vulnerabilities, having good network segmentation, so separating the elements of your business that do different activities and having them logically or physically separating the networks, and using multi-factor authentication. Phishing resistant means not all MFA is created equal. So something like a hardware token or an authenticator app on your phone is stronger than getting an SMS text, for example. Those are things that are more phishing resistant. And then I will leave you with this. We have a no-cost vulnerability scanning program. We deliver weekly encrypted reports that give you an idea of what your attack surface looks like to an adversary. We do this at no cost. It's automated. It's scalable. We encourage folks to sign up for that. And a newer feature is that we will highlight the vulnerabilities that are known to be used in ransomware campaigns for prioritization. So that's it. That's all I've got for today. I look forward at the end to your questions, and I yield the floor. Thanks all.
All right. Dave, thanks very much. I'm going to move us on to the next topic, folks, which will be some of the legal considerations. And here's where we're going to get into some of the polling questions for the CLE credit. So a yes or no question here on the front side. Has the United States enacted a universal or a comprehensive data privacy law at the federal level? And we've got about 425 attendees, so I'll give a couple seconds for folks to chime in. And to take advantage of the dead air, Dave, before you go off of mute, one acronym that came up in the notification part, could you spell out what JCDC is for the audience?
Yep, it stands for Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. It's a program and organization that we have here at CISA that is built specifically to collaborate with industry on cyber risk. So you can sign up to be a member of the JCDC, and then you will be brought in to develop cyber plans to address specific systemic risks that are facing the country, and participate with us in developing products and even receive credit for doing so. And so that's the JCDC.
Thanks very much. All right, we've got about 55% of the folks have chimed in. So in the interest of time, I'm going to give away the answer and go with the next one. So, and I would agree with the majority here on 90% that there is not a federal universal data privacy law. So what do we have? Here within the United States, we have the sectoral approach to industry sectors that the federal government has taken up. You also, depending on the size of your organization, need to be thinking about international laws if you have business partners or customers that are going to be operating and outside of the United States, such as the European Union, the United Kingdom's variant on the GDPR, and the Swiss Federal Act on Data Protection. Brazil, Canada, and China also have laws that you need to be thinking about if you're in the international domain. And our map on the right-hand side is from our state law tracker that shows at the comprehensive side, so it's sort of to cover all aspects of data privacy for residents of particular states. 19 state legislatures have passed comprehensive privacy laws. The ones that are in blue are looking to move the ball forward on that. The ones that are coded in black have tried and failed. Legislation has not come back for reconsideration as of yet. But separate and apart from a comprehensive data privacy law within a particular state, all 50 states in the US have breach notification laws that require a business that has unauthorized access to personal information of the residents of that state to, at a minimum, notify the individuals affected if not notify a governmental entity within that state. And we're going to get to that topic next. But for the moment, we'll do the second poll question of the three. And Dave, while we have this one going as well, when it comes to notification and the outreach that you mentioned for CISA, I've had instances, and I'm certain you've encountered it too, where an organization is going through an event. They're nervous, they're skittish, all of those normal stressors that go on, and they get a call from someone saying they're with CISA and they want to help. And I've had cases where the individuals have not trusted that answer and don't want to talk to that person because they think it's, the threat actor. What are some of the options that the victim company can use there to try to make sure that it's a valid call and get the help that they're entitled to?
Yep, thank you for the question. So again, there's no magic here. Just like we tell members of the public who receive any contact from someone claiming to be a government official, contact the federal agency that they're saying that they work for directly. Any member of the public at any time can always call the phone number for CISA. It's manned 24/7. You'll receive contact with our operations center. They will verify contact from any CISA employees. Another thing that I think is a distinction with difference that sometimes it's a problem we run into is folks don't look at the difference between someone who's asking them questions, trying to solicit information, and someone who's only giving them information and not asking any questions. And then in addition to that, we have folks make contact with us on our dhs.gov email accounts and then reply back from those. We don't email first. So that's a second form of authentication besides calling the agency directly. That's another option that's available.
Great. Thanks very much. Okay, we've got about half of the attendees here for this polling one. So I'm going to move forward a little closer on this result, but the answer would be yes, there is a reporting requirement under law. We don't have the regulations for it yet. And the statute is called the Cyber Incident Reporting Act for Critical Infrastructure that Congress passed in 2022. And I want to point out sort of two different concepts that go with the law on this one. At the statutory part of it, what Congress put into law is a requirement for critical infrastructure owners and operators to notify CISA if they experience a cyber event within 72 hours, and if there is a need to pay a ransom, to notify CISA within 24 hours. So those two deadlines, the time hacks for those obligations, are written into the statute. What is still in the proposed rule phase, and this is something that would be premature for Dave to comment on, so it's partly why I'm bringing it up, is the scope or the definition of what will be a covered entity that must follow that obligation and what would be considered a covered cyber incident to be reported. Those two parts are in flux. The comment period on the public side has closed, and we're waiting to see what the final rule is going to look like. So there will be more to follow on that. But keep in mind that those two time deadlines of 72 hours and 24 hours are part of the law that Congress passed. So other reporting obligations that you need to think about. I kind of split this slide into two halves. On the right-hand side under the watch, we have the phone a friend, who do you want to call and sort of in what order. The resources that are available to you, if your organization experiences an event, talk to your insurance broker or the carrier, because they may have some of these resources that your premiums are already paying for that they can get marshaled and working for you ahead of time. Outside counsel, if you have breach counsel or if you have a relationship with a law firm, this is part of the area that I work in of helping clients quarterback and navigate through the incident response process. That's going to require technical experts and forensic analysis teams to do that. That's part of the relationships that we have, but your insurance carriers probably also have that as well. There may be a value in speaking to law enforcement sooner rather than later, depending on the nature of your industry sector and the nature of the harm that's gone on. So think of those as the resources that would be on your side to help. On the left-hand side in that chart, I tried to group out, in a sense, who are the other organizations that you're going to need to call and under what circumstances. We mentioned that every state in the US has a breach notification law. So if the people whose personal information was in your care and that information is exposed, there's going to be notification deadlines of as short as 30 days and up longer towards 60 days, depending on the state law, to be notifying those individuals. On the federal side, if you have a are part of a regulatory environment such as the healthcare sector or the finance sector, there are going to be different deadlines to talk to those regulators about the fact that you experienced an event. On the state law side, you will see different timelines as well. New York Department of Financial Services has a 72-hour deadline for a covered entity to notify the department of a cybersecurity incident. Vermont's law of interest requires you to notify their Department of Licensing, I believe, on 14 days if you have experienced a cybersecurity incident that affects Vermont residents. Even though the notification to speak to the affected individuals will be later, you're supposed to be notifying their state government sooner. And down there at the bottom, sort of the catch-all, because not only do you have the federal side of it, not only do you have the state side of it, there's the question of, do you have contracts that are going to require notifications? If you're a government contractor, is there an agency notification deadline, such as with the Department of Defense, it's 72 hours. If you have high-value clients, think about the terms and conditions that are often fallen into the boilerplate side of discussions. Those often have expectations that you will notify in performance of the contract within 24 hours or 48 hours of a cybersecurity incident. So all of that becomes part of the incident response plan that Ted's going to talk to. Cybersecurity and insurance coverage. Up here at the top, a lot of the things that are going to be covered oftentimes in part of your insurance policy are some of the costs that we see that are attributed to an incident and a data security problem. One of the questions from the attendees had been, how are those costs quantified? Every organization that models those costs has a different formula for it, but oftentimes they fall into direct costs such as the remediation, repair of the network, the cost of hiring a credit monitoring service, sort of those things that are true out-of-pocket economic costs that you can identify as you rebuild and try to return to normal operations. There are indirect costs that are sometimes harder to quantify that can deal with lost business opportunities, reputational harm, market cap, if you're a publicly traded company that can factor into that analysis as well. So in several of those areas, the insurance services that you have can look to address some of those out-of-pocket pecuniary costs that would be on the front end side of it. What I did want to point out, though, at the bottom here that I put in red, keep in mind that social engineering losses can be outside of a traditional cybersecurity insurance policy, because what those policies are normally designed to do is to prevent an intruder from coming in, stealing your data, or damaging your system. If there is a social engineering scam where a person convinces an employee to redirect a $200,000 payment from the bank account that we've been using for the last 10 months that we've been in business off to a different bank because they claim that there's an audit going on and the bank's not accepting ACH payments, and somebody falls victim to that scam and sends the money to this other bank, you don't have a damage or an intrusion onto your network. You have a criminal loss, based on a scam. That may not be covered under your cybersecurity insurance unless you have a social engineering rider or that would cover it. So that's one thing to keep an eye out as you talk to your carriers. Other thing that comes into play, Dave talked about ransom and ransomware and demands. As Ted gets into the next part of this segment and we discuss incident response planning, this is a good topic to really sit with senior leadership and say, okay, folks, in what sort of situation would we ever consider having to pay a ransom or not? I have a lot of clients and victims that we will interact with where the answer is no way, no how, we'll never do it. And as the event unfolds, there may be pressure points or circumstances that weren't anticipated on that very first knee-jerk reaction to a situation that might change that calculus. There is a lot of societal reasons to not want to pay ransoms. I completely agree with that. And I advise clients on those situations, but it's an aspect of what might happen when you give them that money. You're negotiating with a criminal. And will that criminal live up to their word and either unlock your system? Do they have the technological know-how to do that? Or are you going to only get half of your system or your data back decrypted, and you had paid, in a sense, full price to get all of your data back? Alternatively, the methodology that they're using these days, they will penetrate your system, exfiltrate, make a copy of the data, possibly lock it out, because that takes an additional step and a little bit more technical prowess on their part, and come back and then demand payment. So there is the potential that you can see multiple waves of that extortion cycle where you might be asked to pay in order to have your system unlocked. They might come back months later and say, well, we also have copies of your data and you should pay us this many Bitcoin. And in exchange for that, we promise not to give your intellectual property that we found to your competitor or to publish information out on the dark web. So there's a lot of layers to that onion of what can go on with that extortion pressure to think about. And it's far better, in my opinion, to chew on that with senior leadership in a conference room, over a lunch meeting, and think about those possibilities rather than dealing with it for the first time in a live event. We wanted to talk about insider threat considerations. And with this slide, what I wanted to break out is the aspect of, keep in mind that for insider threats, there are, in a sense, two categories of them. There are people that may be malicious, and then there is the ordinary business pressures that can lead to accidental or negligent behavior. On the left-hand side for the insider threat risk, there was a DOJ press release from August 21st for a conviction on an employee that had been involved in a company. He was a system administrator, had got wind of the fact that there was going to be a reduction in force and that he was likely to be laid off, and he installed a kill switch onto the company's network so that when he was shown the door as part of that layoff cycle, the organization's systems went offline and it disrupted the business. So one of the questions and the takeaways from that is to be mindful of which types of privileged accounts and sysadmin tools are assigned to what individuals, and are they appropriate? Are you keeping that list updated and maintaining it so that only the people that truly need it are the ones that have that elevated access? And do you have audit and logging tools that allow for the company to look for alerts such as unusual activity for late night behavior, large data transfers and downloads, things like that? On the right-hand side, this is a bit more of a soapbox and a public policy aspect of how many business pressures is your workforce facing that can lead to slip-ups or deviations from best practices. I grew up in the aviation industry, and one of the terms for it was incrementally moving away from what was procedure and not seeing adverse consequences leads to further erosion from that procedure. It's called normalization of deviation. And the longer that something is done and there aren't adverse consequences, the more we tend to see creep or drift away from what the best practices or the procedures ought to be. So trying to keep your employees aware of the threats that are out there, not only the benefits that come with technology, especially artificial intelligence, but then some of the downsides and the risks that come with it can be useful. And that's what we look to do with the messaging here. There are certain industries that will talk about mandatory training that are required under HIPAA or under GLBA or under CCPA. I tend to try to distinguish my compulsory training that we put people through for 15, 20 minutes once a year, where they're clicking through boxes to get through the module, with the aspect of, much like a workplace safety department, can you have periodic reminders in and around the workplace or on their login screens and their home pages that will, for virtually no time encroachment on their responsibilities, keep some of these concepts top of mind and remind them that there's reasons that we want to be using stronger passwords and that we don't want to have sensitive paperwork left on a desk when people leave at the end of the day, things like that. Third-party risk management. This is going to be probably one of the bigger topics that we'll see in the second half of 2025 and into 2026, in part because the Department of Defense is about to implement its new contract clauses for Department of Defense business arrangements, contracts that will apply to prime contractors and are required to be flowed down to subcontractors to protect federal contract information or controlled unclassified information. So that's not your top secret or your confidential information that is on a secure military network. This is business information that the government has said is not for public use while you are performing a federal contract. The need for that supply chain due diligence is going to, I think, put greater visibility on the requirements and the business relationships that each of us have with our vendors and our suppliers to make sure that the information we are sharing with them for a valid business purpose is protected. Where are you going to see that most likely? If you have your legal departments involved, they're already well versed in this, and these are the more contentious topics. But the limitations of liability clauses with the software or with the technological tools that are being available. Mergers and acquisitions, this is a new one that I have seen lately. The requirement for a data processing agreement. European countries are familiar with this because the GDPR requires a data processing agreement. But now the California Consumer Privacy Act also expects a contract to be in place between a data collector and a data processor, or a controller and a processor. A lot of companies are saying, well, I have a privacy notice online, I'm good to go. That's really not an accurate reading of what the requirement is. The CCPA is looking to have a business-to-business contract that's enforceable to protect the flow of that information. And then lastly, the boilerplates, terms and conditions. This is where those 48-hour notices are sometimes buried that would require a company to be telling a business partner that something has gone wrong. Other resources that we think about making available to you, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is a voluntary program that is available that gives companies a roadmap for how to structure their governance and their controls, their procedures and documentation to better protect their network. The thing that I also find useful for that is it becomes sort of a common touch point or a common vocabulary as you have two companies that are looking to understand what the technical measures and safeguards are that they each have. Incident response plans and playbooks, I'm going to, in the interest of time, pass the microphone over to Ted and let him pick up on that because that's going to be more in his wheelhouse.
Excellent. Thanks, Eric. And just by way of background before I jump in, again, my name is Ted Tyson. I work at FTI Consulting, where I focus on complex cyber investigations and serve as an expert testifier for cyber litigation. Prior to being in the consulting world, I've been in the consulting world now for about 10 years. Before that, I was a special agent with the FBI, where I investigated cyber matters for the duration of time that I was with the Bureau. And after I left the FBI, I also had a short stint at the Obama White House as his branch chief of cyber integrity, where I still was working in an investigative capacity, but it was more along the lines of insider threats, like data leaks from classified networks to unclassified networks. And like I said, I've been in the private sector ever since. And today I'm going to speak a bit on responding to cyber matters, just to build off what David and Eric have already presented upon. And I will be focusing on IR best practices, risk posed to intellectual property, identification of insider threats, and lastly, I'll discuss a case study of a pretty interesting, tragic, but interesting case I worked while I was with the Bureau. It was a mass shooting at a high school that ended up being a cyber investigation. And so I'll get to that at the end of this presentation. And I am cognizant of time here. And so I will gloss over this. This is NIST 861. I love this, by the way. But in the interest of time, I'm going to gloss over especially the technical components of this. But there are two pertinent components to this process. And like a lot of the resources that David shared, this is free. And so especially those of you working in the private sector, please Google NIST 800-61. And if you're in need of a IR plan, this is the best template to use. I used this process back when I was in the Bureau a million years ago, and it still stands true today. But like I said, I want to focus on the bookends here, the preparation aspect of this and post-incident and recovery. And the preparation part of this, I love that this is included. It's kind of counterintuitive, including a proactive component into a reactive process. But I love that NIST, the 100-pound brains at NIST had the presence of mind to add preparation to their incident response best practice. And this includes what Eric was alluding to, just having an IR plan. But not only having an IR plan, not letting it sit and gather dust, conducting tabletop exercises so that you will practice like you play and play like you practice. And slight digression, and I know this isn't, we're pressed for time here, but one of my favorite quotes that I'm going to butcher is General Eisenhower, and forgive me if I butcher this, but he said something to the extent of, if in preparing for battle, I have found plans to be useless, but planning to be indispensable. And for cyber investigations, I find that to be so true. Every incident is different, and every plan that you have, it's not going to cover all of the minute details associated with a cyber incident, but the act of planning, who to escalate to, inclusion of outside counsel, pay or not pay for ransomware, as Eric alluded to, all of these granular peripheral issues tend to rear their ugly heads during a tabletop exercise. And so I do encourage you to do that as well. And lastly, post-incident recovery. I'm seeing this, which would include like post-breach remediation, after-action reports. I'm seeing this more frequently not used, not conducted, because I feel like people, internally at a victim company getting to containment and eradication, they just want to be done with the issue and move on. And but I do think it's really important to have an after action where you can discuss what was done well, what hatches still need to be battened down, and preventing history from repeating itself. And another area that I covered while I was a special agent with the FBI was intellectual property rights violations. And I focused mostly on software piracy. But lately in the private sector, I found that just about every incident I work, whether it's ransomware, insider threat, a simple phishing scam, there's always an element where there's concerns by inside counsel, outside counsel of what data was touched, and especially what data has been exfiltrated. And ransomware in particular, David talked a lot about ransomware. Historically, like 10 years ago, when I was working ransomware engagements, there wasn't exfiltration of data. But now with 100% of the ransomware gigs that I work today, the threat actors are, prior to encrypting all of the victim company's data, they're exfiltrating mass quantities of data so that not only can they extort on the decryption of the encrypted data, but also they can extort on destruction of the exfiltrated data as well. So they're shrewd business people. But I digress. But questions about intellectual property being touched is usually one of the first questions that I get these days from outside counsel. And I always try to include outside counsel with every data breach that I work. And they'll typically ask me what was touched, what was exfiltrated, what type of data was it? Was it regulated, PHI, PII, et cetera? But the risks are pretty obvious. If there's exfiltration, exposure of trade secrets, client lists. I get a lot of cases today where client lists are exposed to competitors. Counterfeiting, which frequently will result in loss of reputation to victim companies, and just an overall competitive disadvantage. But I want to switch gears to one of the biggest issues that I think is overlooked today with regards to intellectual property, and that's how insider threats have kind of evolved and directly correlate to risks to IP. When responding to incidents, I have to frequently interact with, directly with system administrators and seemingly, trusted personnel to understand their technical infrastructure and the facts and circumstances associated with the incident. And I find it, more and more frequently that they're fatigued. And Eric alluded to this earlier. There's often components of negligence, and so they take pride in their infrastructure, and they may have made mistakes that contributed to the breach, and so there's a lot of sweeping under the rug that you kind of have to sift through when you're dealing with an insider. So there's negligence. And on the other side of the spectrum, I've also walked into circumstances where there's been a lot of publications of information, proprietary information about the breach, but also about the victim company out on social media. Social media is a nightmare to deal with. And so disgruntled, tired information security professionals at victim companies posting short messages, saying things such as, I saw this coming, and it results in being an insider threat investigation on top of a data breach. And so all that to say, how to stay ahead of issues like this. And I tend to focus on indicators of compromise inside a victim company, but I've also found that you can enhance investigations so much more by looking outside of the firewall for threat intelligence and leveraging partners such as CISA, to identify what other threats are out there. And I'm going to gloss over this. Spoiler alert, the answer is C. So what percentage of the internet is Googleable? The reason I say this is because a lot of information security professionals, 52% was the majority, but it's 4 to 6%. But the vast majority of people who think they can Google for threats that are posed against their company, they're only scratching the tip of this iceberg here. And only about 4 to 6% of the surface web is Googleable. And so when you're looking for those threats on open source internet, there's so much more that needs to be identified. And I know we are pressed for time, but I just want to say, if you want to chat with me offline about software recommendations or how to set up an insider threat program or threat intelligence type programs, please, reach out. But I do want to get to the case study, so I'm going to gloss over this. And also you'll get copies of this, of this recording, so you'll be able to review this. But happy to catch up with you afterwards. But just with sensitivity to the time, I'm going to jump right into the case study. And this was March 21st of 2005, when I was a special agent in Minneapolis, and we were notified that there was a tragedy at Red Lake High School, and this is all publicized at this point. But FBI was first to response because we had venue jurisdiction over Native American reservations, and the long story short, the shooter was a disgruntled student, a 16-year-old, who prior to going to the school, he shot his guardian at the time. It was his grandpa and his grandpa's girlfriend, and his guardian had law enforcement responsibilities, and so he grabbed the weapons from his grandpa and his body armor and went to the school and started shooting. Very tragic, security guard lost his life, English teacher lost his life, 14-year-old student, 4 15-year-olds, and the shooter themselves. So very tragic. But in hindsight, and this was 20 years ago when technology was markedly different, this started with the Violent Crime Squad leading this. But there was an abundance of cyber evidence that we had to sift through and analyze. So it ended up becoming a cyber investigation. And through the course of identifying the facts and circumstances of this mass shooting, we were able to identify a lot of postings online and a lot of chat communications, email communications, both personal and private and public email communications. And so all this to say, fast forward to today, this is very similar to how I run an insider threat investigation today, combining the indicators of compromise, the internal evidence with all of the evidence outside of the firewall to draw a better picture of the threats that are posed to an organization. And I'm confident that employing this kind of methodology, that insider threats and tragedies like this can be identified and dealt with with counsel proactively. And I rushed through that. I don't know if there's some time for questions, but I'll pass the baton back over to Eric.
Okay, Ted, thanks very much. Hey, folks, so this is the wrap up of the slide. As far as the Q&As that were in the chat window, I believe we got through all of those. Several folks did ask about slides. Originally, you will have noticed that on Dave's slides at the front end of it, they are the traffic light protocol, or TLP green. So those are not available for public dissemination. But what Ted and I are going to do, we'll split our slides off so you'll get the legal considerations and the FTI consulting side of it, and we will push that out. So thanks for your understanding on that one. And being 1 minute past the scheduled end time, I think we're going to wrap it up. But again, if you would please do the survey for us so that we know if this content was of interest to you and what you would like to see in future events, we will strive to do so. The legal education, to report your hours, go ahead and click on the continuing education link at the top of your screen. We'll send the certificate of attendance out for you as well with the divided up portion of the slide deck, and again, the survey. So thanks very much for joining us, and we hope you found it informative. Take care, everyone.